God is saying, wow, if they'd just not taken that last sip, they wouldn't have gone from sober to drunk. Let's great sorrow. Woe to him, great sorrow to the person who gives drink to his neighbor, pressing him to your bottle, even to make him drunk, that you may look on his nakedness. And somebody say, well, yeah, it's right. It's wrong for a person to try to take advantage of someone by getting them drunk on alcohol. That person deserves to have sorrow if that's the purpose of them trying to give somebody something to drink, to get them where they can't think clearly. Proverbs chapter 20, verse 1. Wine is a mocker, strong drink is a brawler, and whoever is led astray by it is not wise. And the person that would be in favor of drinking in moderation say, well, I agree with that too. I'm definitely against drunkenness. I'm definitely against getting to a point in drinking alcohol that is going to alter a person's judgment. I agree with you on that, but I don't agree that you're saying with you saying taking the position that if you drink any alcohol as a beverage, that's wrong. Well, let's continue. Here we've just finished seeing where it says you're not wise if you're led astray, and that's my point. I don't believe in being led astray. So, is it necessarily wrong for me to drink some? Here's the arguments. Didn't Jesus turn water to wine, that is, to alcohol? Didn't Jesus drink alcohol, wine, at the Passover? Didn't Paul tell Timothy to drink some alcohol, wine? Well, we'll look at those a little bit here in the lesson. But when we look at the word wine in the Bible, in the Hebrew, it's yain. In the Greek, it's onos. And what we have to understand is when you see those words, it always means grape juice. Now, it's translated wine. What we have to understand is when you see the word wine in the Bible, it always means grape juice, but it might be fermented grape juice. But it always means grape juice. So when somebody says, well, the Bible says wine, and we automatically think alcohol. No, because see, for instance, Isaiah chapter 65, verse 8. While the grapes were still on the vine in their clusters, God referred to the juice inside the grape on the cluster as wine. Because the grape juice is always wine, just not necessarily fermented wine. It's determined by the context in which it's used. Someone would argue, well, everyone knows that the grape juice in Bible times could not be preserved. Well, brethren, that's just plain false. A person that says that is just repeating something that they've heard somebody else say that was ignorant on the subject themselves. You can do your own research, go on Google, and Google about being able to preserve grape juice. And what you'll find out is back even during the time of Egypt, when the Israelites were in Egypt, there's murals of people, and then they said, well, Bible talks about grape juice, talks about grapes in Egypt, and everybody knows they couldn't have had those grapes in Egypt, and yet they found pictures, drawings of someone squeezing grapes into the cup of the Pharaoh, exactly as been described in the Bible. And they've learned that the people back then were able to take clusters of grapes, and they had ways of preserving them so that they would last and be fresh for many months, even through the year. As far as the wine itself, there are ways that they were able to preserve it by sinking it into cold water, and it would stay fresh for an indefinite period of time. So when somebody says, well, they had to drink alcohol, the wine they drank had to have alcohol in it, there's no way they could have kept it from being fermented. They just don't know what they're talking about. Beverage will end up looking at their body and saying, where did that come from? Look in the mirror, where did that come from? Wounds, as far as they're concerned, without cause. This beverage will cause the person's eyes to get red. This beverage will cause a person, after drinking it, to see things that aren't there. This beverage will cause people to say things. Their tongue will loosen up. They'll say things that they normally would not say. This beverage will cause a person to stagger around like they're on a boat being tossed back and forth on the sea. This beverage will cause a person, when they're hit, that they won't feel the pain. And this beverage is one that when people have drunk it, after a while they say, I can't wait to get some more of it. Do not look on the wine. When we're talking about wine here, we're talking about grape juice, but is it fermented or unfermented? The context tells us. What are the characteristics of fermented versus unfermented? Well, don't look on the wine, and consider this. Don't look on the wine. That's not a suggestion. And that's not saying that it's wrong to be walking down the Walmart aisle and all of a sudden you look up and they've got a stack of alcohol in the center aisle there, and I've sinned, I've looked upon the wine. No, it's not talking about what you've seen with your eyes. It's talking about what you've participated in. Do not drink this kind of wine. Well, what kind of wine is it? It's the kind that sparkles in the cup, swirls around smoothly, but at the last it bites like a serpent and stings like a viper. Again, does that sound like Welch's grape juice? There's two different types of drinks represented here in this slide. Well, what you've forgotten, Brother Kidwell, is that Jesus turned water to wine. Yes, he did, but he did not turn it to alcohol. John chapter 2, verses 1 through 10. On the third day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus days. And they've run out of wine, which means these people have been drinking wine for several days. And that's why some people would say, well, that's why it mentions they're well drunk. We'll visit that in a moment. Chapter 23 had already been written. Jesus is aware of Proverbs chapter 23, verses 29 and following, where God has said, don't look, don't participate, don't drink this type of beverage, period. And he's going to turn water into that beverage. That's the law in which he lives under. So when someone says Jesus turned water to alcohol, then Jesus, they say, well, maybe he turned it to alcohol, but he didn't drink any of it. So he was just the bartender. He turned water into that would mean that's obviously the alcoholic that was the good stuff. Again, do a little research, and you find out that the best wine is the grape juice, that when they're filling the vats in which they're putting the grapes, and they're going to smash the grapes down and the juice will run out, the best wine was considered the juice that came forth from just the pressure of the grapes on top of the grapes, without any force being pushed down, so that there's no hulls, there's no seeds that are getting mixed in, is affecting the flavor. The very best wine is always that sweetest wine that comes just from the bursting of the grapes and that juice pouring out. So when someone wants to say, well, that means they just don't know what they're talking about. You can do it. You can research it and find out for yourself. Whoever eats what is leavened, that same person shall be cut off from the congregation of Israel, whether he's a stranger or a native of the land. 7 days before the Passover, it's not that they had to quit cooking with leaven. They had to make sure it was completely out of their house. What does it take in order to make wine that's fermented? Well, according to Wine Tidbits, a little publication that if someone wants to claim, well, it was alcoholic, then he violated what God had said concerning yeast. There's no way Jesus was drinking alcohol, because you could not have. And some people would say, well, but the natural progression of the wine, eventually it's going to have some, just from the clusters, there's going to be some fermentation that's beginning to take place. Do you know that according to the Jews, for it to be kosher, they actually boiled their wine? You know what happens when you boil something that has alcohol in it? The alcohol evaporates. It could not have any yeast in it. Well, Paul told Timothy to drink some wine. Well, yes, he did. Now, was he telling him to drink alcohol? That's up for judgment as to maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. I'll give you that. But let's look at it. 1 Timothy 5, verse 23. No longer drink only water, which is interesting here, because some brethren have actually argued with me, well, Brother Kidwell, they didn't have anything else to drink. They had to drink wine, and it had to be alcoholic. Well, then why is Paul telling Timothy, quit drinking just water? If they had to drink wine, why is Timothy just drinking water? And why does Paul tell Timothy to drink a little wine? But use a little wine for your stomach's sake and your frequent infirmities. You know, Timothy is a missionary. He's going to different lands where he's not used to the water. I understand that. When I've gone to South America, I've had to be very careful about not drinking their water, about not having anything with ice in it, because it's made with their water. And I have come in contact with the varmints anyway, somehow trying to stay away from it. I've eaten or drank something that came from their water, and I was miserable. It affected my stomach, and I needed some medicine. Is Paul telling Timothy, you know, when you eat your meal, you need to change up your diet. You know, every once in a while, just have a glass of alcohol. No, He isn't saying anything about what he drinks as a beverage with his meal. He's saying you've got some stomach problems, you need to take some medicine. Let's suppose that you're going to a friend's house. He's invited you there for supper, and he's cooking steaks out on the grill, and his wife is inside and got the baked potatoes that are nice and hot, and the yeast rolls that are, you can smell them, and everything's just fixed. It smells so good, and he sets it on the table, and then he says to you, would you like red or green NyQuil with your steak? And you say, well, what are you talking about? That's medication. That's right. It has alcohol in it, but it is medication. There's a difference between alcohol being used for medicinal purposes versus it being used as a beverage. Why would a Christian defend the use of alcohol as a beverage? We know it's a fact that just 2 drinks a day increases cancer by 400% in the body. That's just a scientific medical fact. 1 Corinthians 6, 19, 20, Paul tells us that our body doesn't belong to us. It belongs to God. And so if we're going to on purpose do something, put something in our body that we know is going to destroy it, brethren, that is sinful. And then the question is, where those that would say, well, they had no option. They had to drink alcohol. Well, let's just push that aside. Is that the case today? Do we have no options as to what tea and Kool-Aid and lemonade and colas? We've got lots of options. So, are we drinking it because it tastes so good? Reminds me of the fellow that came up to another man. He had a jug in his hand and a gun in one hand. He shoved the jug in the other man's hand. He said, take a drink of that. And the man's going, I don't want to drink. There might be somebody say, oh, no, that's not true in my case. But everybody I've ever visited with, when they first drank alcohol, they didn't say, boy, that stuff's good. It's an acquired taste. Now, it becomes something that that becomes a taste that they like, but it didn't start out that way. And how you should live to be faithful to Him. Would you like a beer while we're studying? I taught driver's ed a few years back when I was in the mission field, needing to supplement my income. And I asked these teenagers, because we had to have a session on alcohol and the laws of the land, and I asked them, why do people drink alcohol? And 100% of the time, I got this answer from hundreds. I never had a variation from this answer. The answer was always because people like the way it makes them feel. They never said because it tastes so good. Every time is because they like the way it makes them feel. Now, some people like it so much, like the way it makes them feel just passing out drunk. Some people like it to where they're just staggering around drunk. Some people like it to where they're just loosened up drunk. Some like it to where they're just relaxing drunk. But everybody liked it because of the way it made them feel. Well, what about Romans chapter 14? You know, Paul there in Romans chapter 14 said, don't judge your brother based upon the meat or the wine. Now think about this. whatever's wrong, whatever the person, and somebody saying, well, that means that Paul is telling them, if your brother decides to drink wine, alcohol, don't judge him. That's up to him. Well, whatever it is that we're judging that person when it comes to the wine, it's the same thing that we're judging them when it comes to the meat. So is the meat fermented? Because they're both wrong for the same reason as far as what's the judgment being passed there. Another thing that's sometimes used is Ephesians 5, verse 18. Be not drunk with wine, which is excess, the old King James says. Now, that causes people to think that means don't drink too much. Now, you investigate that, and you'll see. Do not drink wine which is excess. Is God saying it's okay to drink a little? Well, if that's okay, then in Ecclesiastes chapter 7, verse 17, in the New King James Version, God says, do not be overly wicked. You can be a little bit of wicked. Just don't be overly wicked. See the problem with that? God never gives us permission to be involved in just a little bit of wickedness, a little bit of sin, a little bit of drunkenness. 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 11. This ought to answer. We really shouldn't have to look at anything else if we'll just take this one scripture and apply it honestly. Beloved, I begged you as sojourners and pilgrims, abstain. Now, what's the word abstain mean? Moderation? Just a little bit? Abstain from fleshly lust which war against the soul. So here's the question. Does alcohol as a beverage appeal to the flesh? Yes, it does. People crave it once they get involved in drinking it. It is a fleshly lust, and therefore, knowing what it does to those that participate in drinking it, does it war against the soul? The honest person would have to say yes. And so the answer for the Christian that is wanting to live a godly life, to be pleasing to God, has no problem when they're asked, what would God have us to do when it comes to alcohol as a beverage? Abstain. Thank you for your attention.